I still remember the weight of that first pair of stockings in my hands. How impossibly soft they felt. How something so delicate could make my heart pound as if I was holding a secret the world wasn't meant to see. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even something I'd imagined myself doing. But that night, when I reached into that drawer and brushed against the silky fabric, something inside me shifted. Like the world had cracked open for a second, and I glimpsed a version of myself I wasn't ready to meet. It started innocently enough. I'd been house-sitting for my cousin Leah. She was traveling for work, and her apartment felt like a museum of calm. Soft lighting, neat furniture, faint perfume lingering in the air. I was 24 then, still trying to figure out who I was. Drifting between jobs, pretending I had a plan. That night, it rained hard outside, and the wind kept pressing against the windows as if asking to come in. I made tea, put on one of Leah's oversized hoodies, and scrolled through my phone, feeling restless for no reason I could name. When I went to put my phone on the nightstand, the drawer stuck a little. I tugged it open and saw them. A folded pair of black stockings, sheer and smooth, with a faint shimmer under the lamplight. Something about them caught me off guard. They looked fragile, almost alive in their stillness. I should have closed the drawer right then. I told myself I should. But my hand didn't listen. The fabric slid through my fingers like water, cool at first, then warm. I remember laughing nervously to myself. Why was my heart racing? It was just clothing. But it wasn't not to me. It was like touching a secret language I somehow already knew. My reflection in the mirror beside the bed seemed to stare back differently. Questioning, searching. For a few minutes, I stood there just holding them, feeling like time had slowed down. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling slightly, and I don't even know what made me do it. I slipped one stocking over my foot. The sensation was electric. The smoothness, the gentle pressure, the way it hugged my skin. It sent a quiet wave through me, not of excitement but of recognition. Like my body had been waiting for this exact feeling without knowing it. The other stocking followed, and I stared at my legs, pale beneath the sheer black fabric, and suddenly I didn't feel like me anymore. Or maybe for the first time I did. It was terrifying. I didn't know what to do with the emotions colliding inside me. Part shame, part wonder, part longing. I kept hearing my own voice in my head, whispering, "What are you doing?" But the other voice, the softer one, the one I'd ignored for years, whispered back, "This feels right." I spent the rest of the night pacing, sitting, standing in front of the mirror, unable to look away. Every few seconds I'd pull them off, then put them back on again, like I was trying to control the flood of emotion they had unleashed. The reflection wasn't just me in stockings. It was something deeper. A softness I'd buried. A truth I couldn't yet name. When morning came, sunlight crept through the blinds, painting thin gold lines across the room. It felt exposed, fragile. I folded the stockings neatly and placed them back in the drawer, as if undoing the night could erase what had happened. But it didn't. The feeling lingered. It followed me like a quiet echo, whispering every time I looked at my legs or brushed my hands over my skin. 4 days after that I tried to forget. I threw myself into work, stayed longer hours, avoided thinking about it. But sometimes when I was alone, I'd catch myself daydreaming, remembering the soft texture, the way I'd felt calm and alive all at once. And then one evening Leah called. She said she'd be back earlier than planned. Panic. Not because of the stockings, they were right where I found them, but because her return meant that small world I'd built in her apartment, the world where I could breathe differently, was ending. When she came back, everything seemed normal. She hugged me, thanked me for keeping the place tidy, asked about my week. I smiled, pretending to listen. But I could feel something stirring again beneath the surface. I kept replaying that night over and over in my mind, each time adding details I wasn't sure were real anymore. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "Oh, I hope you didn't mind me leaving my laundry in the drawer." I didn't even remember which ones I left there. Froze. She didn't suspect anything. Her tone was casual, but the guilt hit me hard. My face burned. I laughed awkwardly and said it was fine, that I hadn't touched anything. But the lie tasted heavy. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The guilt twisted into something else. Curiosity mixed with yearning. Why did it feel so wrong and yet so necessary? Why did something as simple as stockings make me feel more me than anything else had in years? I didn't have answers. But I knew the questions weren't going away. That's how it began. Quietly, almost accidentally. A single act that cracked something open. I didn't know it yet, but that small moment in Leah's apartment would unravel everything I thought I knew about myself. It was the start of a journey I didn't plan for, one that would test every piece of who I was. And looking back now, I can say this with certainty. Those stockings weren't just fabric. They were a doorway. I thought the feeling would fade. I thought maybe if I ignored it long enough, it would dissolve into memory, like a dream that loses its shape by morning. But it didn't. Stayed. It grew quietly in the background of my everyday life. Persistent, patient, impossible to silence. At work, I'd catch glimpses of women walking confidently down the hallway. The soft swish of fabric, the delicate click of heels, the way their expressions carried both power and grace. Something inside me stirred every time. It wasn't desire. Not in the way people would assume. It was something closer to longing. I wanted to feel what they seemed to feel, that quiet confidence wrapped in softness. But how do you explain that to anyone? I'd go home and sit in front of my mirror, staring at my reflection like it was a puzzle missing too many pieces. Sometimes I'd imagine what it would be like if I didn't have to pretend, if I could just exist the way my heart whispered I should. But then the rational part of me would slam the door shut. That's not you. That's not real. And yet, one night I found myself back at it. I didn't have Leah's stockings anymore, but I couldn't stop thinking about them. I walked into a small clothing store after work, the kind of place that always seemed to smell faintly of perfume and soft cotton. My pulse raced as I stepped inside, pretending to browse for a gift. Every part of me screamed that I shouldn't be there, but I stayed. A saleswoman approached me, smiling kindly. "Can I help you find something?" I froze, every excuse vanishing from my mind. Just looking," I stammered, trying to sound casual. But her smile didn't fade. She just nodded, as if she understood something I didn't dare say. Minutes passed before I picked up a simple pair of black stockings from a display rack. They looked almost identical to Leah's. My hands trembled slightly as I carried them to the register. I half expected her to say something, to give me that look people give when they know. But she didn't. She just scanned them, placed them in a bag and said softly, "They're lovely. You'll look great in them." For a moment I forgot how to breathe. Did she mean it literally? Was she teasing me? I couldn't tell. I just nodded and left, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Back home I placed the small bag on my bed and just stared at it for a long time. That same quiet electricity filled the room. My fingers brushed over the smooth packaging, and I felt the same sense of crossing a line. But this time it wasn't borrowed. It was mine. My choice. When I finally opened it, the scent of new fabric filled the air. I sat on the edge of my bed again, hands trembling, and slipped them on. The moment they touched my skin, that feeling returned. Stronger now, sharper, but still calm in its own way. It wasn't just about how they felt. It was about who I felt like in them. I looked in the mirror, my legs covered in the same delicate black shimmer, and the reflection staring back seemed to exhale for the first time. The difference wasn't physical, it was something in the eyes. A softness, a kind of quiet truth I couldn't fake. And then something unexpected happened. Smiled. Not the usual practiced smile I wore around others, but a small, genuine curve of the lips that felt new. That night, I didn't rush to take them off. I walked around my apartment, brushing my fingers along the walls, feeling the cool air on my skin, my body strangely light. The mirror wasn't something I wanted to avoid anymore. For once, I didn't see someone pretending. But the peace didn't last. A few days later, my friend Marcus dropped by unannounced. He was the kind of guy who never knocked. He just texted "yo" and assumed the door was open. I panicked when I heard the knock, remembering the stockings drying in the bathroom. My stomach twisted as I rushed to grab them, nearly tripping over myself, heart racing like I was hiding evidence of a crime. He walked in just as I shoved them into a drawer. "You good man?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," I said, forcing a laugh. "Just cleaning up." He looked around, shrugged, and threw himself onto the couch. But I couldn't shake the anxiety. Every sound made me flinch. What if he found out? What would he think? What would anyone think? That night after he left, I sat in silence, realizing how much fear had taken hold of me. I'd discovered something that felt truer than anything before, yet it was tangled with guilt and secrecy. It was exhausting, wanting to hide and be seen at the same time. The next morning I stood in front of the mirror again. The reflection looked tired, uncertain. But the stockings lay there, folded neatly on the dresser, waiting. I picked them up, and for a moment, all the fear fell away. "This is me," I whispered, not sure if I believed it yet. But it felt like the start of believing. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about clothing. It wasn't even about femininity, not exactly. It was about peeling back the layers of who I was supposed to be and discovering the person buried underneath. The stockings were just the first layer. But I had no idea how many more layers there were to come, or how deeply they'd change everything. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope between two versions of myself. The one the world saw, quiet, responsible, predictable, and the one that existed only behind closed doors, the one I was still learning to recognize in the mirror. I tried to balance them, but the line between them blurred a little more each day. Started small. I began noticing the way my voice softened when I spoke to myself alone. I noticed the gentleness in my movements, the way I crossed my legs differently, the way I lingered longer in the shower just to trace my fingers along my skin as though I were studying someone new. It wasn't performative. It felt instinctive, like something that had always been waiting to emerge. But every time I tried to embrace it, fear followed close behind. Fear of being caught, of being judged, of losing control of a secret that had begun to define my quietest hours. Still, that fear didn't stop me, it just made me careful. One evening, while scrolling through my phone, I found myself searching for things I didn't even know how to name. I typed vague phrases into the search bar. Men wearing women's clothes, learning to express femininity, gender identity stories. Each search felt like a small confession. And what I found was a whole world of people, voices whispering the same secret I thought was mine alone. There were stories. There were photos. There were confessions written by strangers who sounded like they'd lived my life. Some spoke of courage, others of confusion, but every one of them carried a thread of understanding that pulled at my heart. For the first time, I didn't feel completely alone. I remember one post in particular, a simple line that burned itself into me. "It's not about pretending to be someone else. It's about finally being the self you never gave permission to exist." That line echoed through my mind for days. It was late one Friday when I decided to take a small step further. I went out again, this time to a thrift shop on the quieter end of town. The place was dimly lit, filled with mismatched clothes and the faint scent of fabric softener and dust. There was no judgment there, only racks of forgotten stories waiting to be found. I drifted toward the women's section, heart thudding, pretending to browse casually. My hands brushed against soft blouses, light scarves, and then a pastel cardigan that looked like it belonged to another life entirely. I held it against me, imagining the feeling of wearing it, and something about that image made my throat tighten. Bought it. No explanation, no excuses this time. When the cashier smiled and said, "That's a pretty choice," I simply said, "Thanks," and meant it. At home, I laid the cardigan on my bed beside the stockings. The contrast was almost poetic, one symbolizing the secret that started it all, the other symbolizing the next step. I slipped it on button by button. It was soft, almost weightless, and yet the moment it rested on my shoulders, I felt grounded, as if I'd been carrying invisible weight for years and had finally put it down. I looked in the mirror, and this time I didn't just see change. Saw peace. But peace, I would learn, doesn't come without consequence. The next day, while folding laundry, my mother called. She wanted to visit the following weekend. My stomach tightened instantly. She'd always been kind but traditional, the kind of person who measured life in expectations. The idea of her finding anything, the stockings, the cardigan, terrified me. That week I hid everything. I tucked the stockings in an old shoebox and slid it under my bed. The cardigan went into a bag in the back of the closet. Every time I glanced at the closed door, it felt like locking away a part of myself I wasn't ready to defend. When she arrived, the apartment filled with her familiar presence. Warm, loving, and yet somehow heavy. We had dinner together, and she talked about her friends, about work, about how proud she was that I was getting more responsible. I smiled and nodded, but it felt like she was praising a version of me that didn't exist anymore. That night, after she went to sleep, I found myself standing in front of the mirror again, the silence pressing down on me. I looked at my reflection, tired, hidden, small. And without really thinking, I reached for the cardigan. I slipped it on, buttoned it slowly, and felt that same calm wash over me. I sat on the edge of the bed, the dim light casting soft shadows, and for a few minutes I just breathed. Then, from the hallway, I heard the sound of movement. Floorboard creaked. Froze. My mother's voice, quiet but curious. "Are you still up?" Panic flared. I yanked the cardigan off and shoved it behind a pillow, heart pounding so hard it made my hands shake. "Yeah," I said quickly, trying to sound normal. "Just couldn't sleep." She peeked in, smiling softly. "You've always been a night owl." Her eyes scanned the room for a moment, then she nodded. "Get some rest, okay?" I nodded. She closed the door and I sat there, trembling. After she left the next morning, I took out the cardigan again. My hands were still shaking, but not from fear this time. From realization. I couldn't keep hiding forever. Each time I tried to lock that part of myself away, it came back stronger, like it refused to be silenced anymore. That afternoon, I took the cardigan and the stockings, folded them carefully, and placed them on the bed. Then I whispered to myself, if this is who I am, I have to start living like it. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't bravery. It was quiet acceptance. Fragile, trembling, but real. I didn't know it yet, but that whisper would be the first step toward a storm of changes I wasn't ready for. Because once you start seeing yourself clearly, you can't unsee it. And the world doesn't always like what it can't understand. The first real test came sooner than I expected. It was subtle at first. Tiny, almost forgettable moments that somehow meant everything. I started wearing the cardigan again, late at night when the world felt quiet enough to let me breathe. But each time I did, I found myself staying up later, staring into the mirror, wondering if what I was doing was wrong, or if pretending not to was the real mistake. I began experimenting in small ways. Subtle things. A little moisturizer on my face before bed. Letting my hair grow out just a bit longer. Picking softer colors when I bought new clothes. Shirts that brushed the line between masculine and feminine but stayed safe enough to pass as neutral. To anyone else, it probably looked like nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. There was a shift in how I carried myself, in the way I moved through the world. The truth was, I felt lighter. But that lightness came with a strange kind of loneliness too, because this new version of me had no one to exist for except me, and I didn't even know how to introduce her to the world. The thought of telling anyone made my chest tighten. I'd imagine the looks, the confusion, the awkward silence. What if they laughed? What if they thought I was sick or broken or worse? What if they pitied me? So I kept it all inside. My world became a secret that only existed between me, the mirror, and the silence. Then, one Friday evening, I met someone who unknowingly changed everything. Her name was Emma. She was a friend of a coworker, and we met at a casual get-together after work. I almost didn't go. I'd been avoiding social things for months, but something in me needed to feel normal again. So I went. Emma was different. She had this calm energy about her, a kind of warmth that made people feel safe without trying. She talked with her hands, laughed easily, and seemed to actually listen when others spoke. When she turned that attention toward me, I felt seen in a way that startled me. "You're quiet," she said, sipping her drink. "But not in a bad way. You listen more than you talk, huh?" I smiled, caught off guard by her directness. Something like that. He grinned. That's rare. People usually talk just to fill silence. You let it breathe. It was such a simple thing to say, but it stayed with me. For the first time in a while, I felt comfortable being me, whatever that meant now. Over the next few weeks, Emma and I started hanging out more. Coffee, movies, random walks after work. There was no pressure, no judgment. Just easy conversation. She had this ability to make the world feel simple, like it didn't matter if you didn't fit perfectly inside it. One night, we were watching an old film at her apartment. It was one of those black and white classics where every gesture felt meaningful. Halfway through, she paused the movie and turned to me. Can I ask you something? Sure. You ever feel like you're pretending all the time? Like, the person everyone thinks you are isn't exactly the one you see in the mirror? Her question hit me so hard I forgot to breathe. I wanted to answer honestly, to tell her everything, but the words tangled up inside me. I looked away, tracing the rim of my glass with my finger. Yeah, I said softly. More than I'd like to admit. She didn't push. She just nodded, her expression thoughtful. You don't have to tell me what it is. Just don't lose whoever that real version of you is. Even if it scares you. I went home that night and sat in front of my mirror again. Her words echoed in my head like a quiet song. Don't lose whoever that real version of you is. I pulled out the cardigan and the stockings, laid them out, and looked at them like old friends. My reflection felt both fragile and powerful, as if I was balancing between two truths, who I'd been and who I was becoming. And for the first time I didn't feel ashamed. Felt curious. The next morning something shifted. I stopped seeing what I was doing as something to hide. I started thinking of it as something to understand. I went online and ordered a few things, a gentle cleanser, some light concealer, and a soft pink nail polish that I told myself was just for fun. When the package arrived a few days later, my hands shook as I opened it. Each item looked harmless enough, but together they felt monumental. I started small, dabbed a touch of concealer under my eyes, applied the polish only to my toes, where no one could see. But even that small act filled me with a quiet thrill. It wasn't vanity. It was expression. It was identity trying to find its shape. Still, I couldn't ignore the fear. I kept thinking about what would happen if someone saw. What if a friend dropped by unexpectedly again? What if they noticed the polish or the faint shimmer of concealer on my skin? The irony was that, while I was terrified of being seen, I also desperately wanted to be. A week later, Emma invited me to a small weekend trip with a few friends. I hesitated but agreed. It was just a cabin by the lake, nothing fancy. The first night there, everyone sat around the fire laughing, sharing stories. I felt relaxed until Emma leaned over and whispered, "You seem lighter lately. Happier. Something's different about you." Froze. Different how? She smiled. I don't know. Softer. Hummer. Like you're starting to breathe again. Her words struck something deep inside me. I didn't respond, just smiled weakly and looked toward the fire. But all night, I kept replaying what she'd said. Maybe she saw more than I thought. Maybe she already knew. When everyone went to sleep, I stepped outside alone. The lake reflected the stars like shattered glass, the air cool and still. I looked at my reflection in the water, dim, uncertain, yet oddly beautiful, and whispered, "I don't want to hide anymore." The words drifted away with the wind, but something inside me heard them loud and clear. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, standing barefoot by the water, feeling the cool night air kiss my skin, was the first time I truly began to live as myself, even if no one else knew who that was yet. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. After that weekend at the lake, everything started to feel slightly off in the best way possible. The walls I'd spent years building around myself didn't seem quite so strong anymore. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and decided to change everything. It was subtler than that, like a slow current pulling me toward somewhere I'd always belonged but never dared to visit. When I came home, I opened my closet and just stood there for a long time. The clothes hung neatly, a palette of muted grays and blues, practical and safe. They represented who I had been. Predictable, invisible, unremarkable. Then my eyes drifted to the small section tucked in the corner. The pastel cardigan, the folded stockings, the quiet beginnings of something more. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I reached out, ran my hand over the fabric, and felt that familiar wave of calm. I decided then that maybe it was time to stop treating this side of me as a secret hobby and start treating it as a part of my life. A real, living part of me. So I started experimenting more. Not in a rush, but with care, like someone learning to breathe underwater. A pair of slim jeans that fit differently. A softer hairstyle. Small, almost invisible changes that only I noticed. Each adjustment felt like a quiet rebellion against the version of myself I'd been told to be. But the truth is, living in secret takes energy. Every day felt like a balancing act, between the self the world saw and the self that bloomed in the shadows. It became exhausting. And yet, every time I saw that softer reflection in the mirror, I found strength in it too. Then something happened that forced me to face what I'd been avoiding. I got invited to Leah's engagement party. Leah, the cousin whose Stockings had unknowingly started all of this. When her message arrived, I hesitated before even opening it. We hadn't spoken much since that time I stayed at her apartment. Not because of anything she did, but because of what I'd done. That secret still sat heavy in my chest. Her message was cheerful, full of emojis and exclamation marks, but it hit me like a quiet test I hadn't studied for. I stood in front of the mirror, thinking about what I'd wear. Normally, I wouldn't have cared much. But now it felt like standing at a crossroads. Did I show up as the person everyone expected? Or the person I was becoming? I didn't have an answer yet. The night before the party, I sat on my bed surrounded by clothes. Nothing looked right. The shirts felt stiff, the jeans felt wrong, and the reflection staring back seemed disconnected from everything I tried on. Then I glanced at the cardigan. It was such a simple thing. Pastel, soft, unassuming, but it carried weight. It reminded me of every small step I'd taken toward myself. I picked it up and smiled. Maybe just this, I whispered. The next day I wore it. Not in a flashy way, not as a statement, just quietly, layered under a neutral jacket. I told myself no one would even notice. When I arrived, the room buzzed with laughter, music, and clinking glasses. Leah looked radiant. And seeing her made me both proud and strangely emotional. She hugged me tightly, her perfume surrounding me in a wave of nostalgia. "You look great," she said warmly. "That's a new look for you, isn't it?" I froze for a split second. My mind raced. Did she know? Was it the cardigan? The softened hair? The subtle polish on my nails I thought no one could see? Then she smiled wider, teasingly. "It suits you. You look happier." I laughed nervously but couldn't help smiling back. "Thanks, Leah. You do too." For the rest of the night, her words echoed in my head. "You look happier." It wasn't judgment. It wasn't confusion. It was simple observation. And in its simplicity it meant everything. After the party, I walked home through quiet streets, the night air cool against my face. I thought about how something so small, a compliment, a glance, could shift everything. I didn't know if Leah had noticed the subtle changes, or if she'd just seen what I was finally allowing to show. Either way, it made me realize something profound. Maybe the world didn't need to fully understand me for me to exist in it. Maybe I didn't need to explain. Maybe I just needed to be. That night, back in my room, I sat in front of the mirror again. The same way I had that first time with Leah's Stockings. The same mirror. The same uncertain gaze. But this time I didn't see guilt or fear staring back. I saw someone growing. Awkwardly, imperfectly, but beautifully. I took a deep breath, looked at my reflection and said softly, "I don't know who you'll become yet, but I'm ready to meet you." The words felt fragile and powerful all at once. That was the night I stopped apologizing to myself. But life, I soon learned, doesn't let revelations go untested. Because the moment you start to embrace who you are, the world finds ways to question it. And sometimes those questions don't come from strangers, they come from the people closest to you. I didn't know it then, But the next chapter of my life would unravel everything I thought I was ready for. Because it's one thing to discover who you are. It's another to let the world see it. Started as a game. Or maybe I told myself that because admitting it had become something deeper felt too real, too irreversible. When I slipped on the pink cardigan that morning, the same one Claire had left on the back of her chair, it wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was comfort. It was quiet. It was me, in a way that I didn't yet know how to say aloud. The morning light poured in through the blinds, slicing across my face and the pale walls. My reflection in the mirror looked both strange and strangely right. The soft pink against my skin didn't look borrowed anymore. It looked like it belonged. My heart beat fast, not from fear this time, but from the terrifying thought that maybe I had stopped pretending. I sat down at the edge of the bed, my mind still echoing from the night before. Claire's words kept replaying. "You're not just trying things on, are you?" And I couldn't decide whether she had meant it as an accusation or an invitation. I'd seen the way she looked at me last night when I confessed how I felt. Not disgusted. Not even surprised. Just searching. Like she had known long before I did. That morning she knocked softly on my door. I froze for a moment, then muttered, "Yeah." The door creaked open and she peeked in. She was wearing her usual work outfit. Sleek black blouse, hair up, coffee mug in hand, but her eyes softened when she saw me. "You're wearing my cardigan again," she said, smiling gently. I smiled nervously. "I can take it off if—" "Don't," she interrupted. "It suits you." I swallowed hard. "You really think so?" She stepped into the room, her perfume filling the air like a quiet memory. "I don't think you realize how much you change when you let yourself be comfortable," she said. "You relax. You stop overthinking. You just exist." Her words hit deeper than I expected. I looked down at my hands. "It's strange," I murmured. "I feel more myself when I look like someone else." Claire tilted her head. "Or maybe this is yourself, and you've just been taught to hide it." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight, like my body was catching up to something my heart already knew. She walked over to my vanity, the same one that used to hold her makeup, and picked up a tube of mascara. "You ever wonder what you'd look like if you went all the way?" I looked up at her reflection, confused. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly. "Not just the clothes. The full picture. Hair, makeup, posture, everything." My pulse quickened. "That's a lot." "Maybe," she said softly. "But maybe you need to see what I see." There was something in her voice. Not teasing, not daring, just honest. And in that moment, I wanted to trust her more than I trusted myself. She set the mascara down and turned toward me. "If you're okay with it, I want to help." I could only nod. Words felt too fragile for what that moment meant. She started small, foundation, light powder, the way she said, "Close your eyes," like a whisper, the gentle drag of the brush against my skin. I could feel my heart in my throat with every stroke. It wasn't just makeup. It was transformation. Quiet ritual. When she finished the last touch, a hint of lip tint, soft pink again, she stepped back. "Okay," she said, her voice low. "Now look." I turned toward the mirror slowly, afraid to breathe. And for a split second, I didn't recognize the person staring back. The jawline seemed softer, the eyes bigger, the expression vulnerable but alive. My lips parted slightly as I tried to find myself in that reflection, and then I realized I already had. "It's me," I whispered. Claire smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. "It's you," she echoed. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. I hadn't expected it to feel so emotional, so heavy, so right. Every wall I'd built over the years, every should, every don't, started to crumble in that reflection. Claire stepped closer, her voice calm. "You don't have to rush into understanding everything. Just breathe. Let it be what it is." I nodded, unable to speak. I stared at the mirror again, at the gentle expression, the soft smile, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was pretending. She smiled. "You see now why I said it suits you." I laughed through the tears. "Yeah. I think I finally do. She leaned against the dresser, watching me quietly. So what happens next? She asked. I looked back at the mirror, still half lost in it. I don't know, I admitted. But for once, I'm not afraid to find out. The sunlight shifted across the room, catching the shimmer of my lip gloss. I stared into my reflection, at this delicate, uncertain version of myself, and somewhere deep inside, a thought formed that I couldn't quite say aloud yet. The stockings weren't the start anymore. They were just a memory of where it began. 4 days after that morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror. Not just what I saw, but how it felt, the quiet peace that came with recognizing myself in a way I never had before. Every reflection since then seemed different, as though the world had subtly shifted its focus and was finally letting me come into view. But with that newfound calm came an ache, a whisper of doubt that threaded itself into every thought. What if the world doesn't see what I see? I kept that question tucked away, hidden beneath polite smiles and quiet days. Claire noticed, of course. She always did. One evening after dinner, she leaned on the counter and looked at me with that same searching gaze she'd had before. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. I tried to brush it off. "Just thinking." She didn't buy it. "About what?" I hesitated. "About how people see me. How they'd react if they knew." Claire set her glass down. "You mean if they saw you the way I do?" Her words disarmed me. I swallowed. "Yeah, that." She folded her arms, her voice calm but steady. "You can't control how people see you. But you can choose whether their vision matters more than your truth." I wanted to believe that. But believing and living it were two different things. The next day, I had to go into the office, a place where I'd always worn the same uniform of monotone shirts and quiet confidence. But now that outfit felt foreign. I caught myself hesitating at my closet, my fingers brushing over the clothes that used to feel safe. They didn't anymore. Instead, I picked something different. Still subtle, still safe for work, but with small traces of the person I was beginning to see. A softer fabric, a lighter shade, a scent that lingered just faintly when I moved. It wasn't an announcement. It was a whisper, my whisper. The walk to work felt longer than usual. I noticed everything. The way my shoes clicked on the pavement, the way the wind brushed against the back of my neck, the way people glanced, or maybe didn't. Every look felt like a question, every reflection in a window like a reminder that I was still balancing between two worlds. At my desk, I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting. I felt both proud and terrified. It was strange, feeling so alive yet so unsure of what came next. During lunch, my colleague Ryan sat beside me. He was friendly enough, always joking, always observant. "New look?" he asked casually. My stomach tightened. "Something like that," I said, forcing a smile. He nodded, sipping his drink. "Looks good on you." Then, as if sensing my discomfort, he added, "Don't overthink it. People notice when someone's finally comfortable in their own skin. That's all it is." I didn't expect kindness. That one simple comment loosened something inside me. Maybe the world wasn't as cruel as my fear imagined. That evening when I came home, Claire was waiting, not with questions, but with that quiet, knowing smile again. "How was your day?" she asked. I sat down on the couch, exhaling slowly. "Strange. But better than I thought." She smiled wider. "That's how growth feels. Uneasy but right." I glanced at her, curious. "You sound like you've done this before." I shrugged. "In my own way, sure. Learning who you are is always a process of unlearning who you were told to be." Her words echoed in my head long after she went to bed. That night I stood in front of the mirror again, not in full makeup, not dressed like before. Just me. And I stared, quietly, at the reflection of someone who wasn't trying to figure out if he looked right anymore. I wasn't perfect. I wasn't certain. But I was becoming. And maybe that was enough. Still, beneath all that calm, something stirred, a pull toward something bigger, something unseen. I didn't know what waited for me beyond this fragile balance between fear and freedom. But I could feel it calling. The next step wasn't about appearance anymore. It was about truth, about stepping into a world that might not understand, and finding the courage to exist anyway. The rain came that weekend, soft and steady, as if the world itself was trying to wash everything clean. I sat by the window, the cardigan wrapped around my shoulders, watching the water streak down the glass. Each droplet caught the city's reflection, blurred lights, distorted shapes, faint outlines of people rushing by, and I wondered if that's what I looked like to the world now. Half-formed in motion, neither what I was nor what I would be. Claire was in the kitchen, humming quietly to herself as she made tea. The sound was grounding, simple, ordinary, the kind of comfort I hadn't realized I'd needed. When she brought me a cup, she looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You've been looking at that rain for half an hour," she said softly. "You planning to go somewhere?" I smiled faintly. "I don't know. Maybe I should." She tilted her head. "Where?" I hesitated. "Outside. Like this." I gestured at myself. The soft sweater, the jeans that fit differently now, the faint traces of lip balm I'd grown used to. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't look surprised. "You mean, as you?" The way she said it, not like a question but like a truth already known, sent a strange warmth through my chest. "Yeah," I said quietly. "As me." Claire took a slow sip of her tea. "Then go." And blinked. "Just like that." "Just like that," she said. "You've been waiting for permission that no one but you can give." The simplicity of her words broke something loose inside me. I stood up, heart racing, and looked down at myself again. I'd gone out countless times before, but this was different. This time I wasn't going as who people expected me to be. Claire reached for her purse and tossed me an umbrella. "In case the rain gets heavier," she said, her tone casual but her smile full of quiet pride. When I stepped outside, the air felt new, sharp, alive. The rain kissed my cheeks, and for a moment I felt exposed, every insecurity rising to the surface. What if people stared? What if they knew? What if they didn't? But then I started walking. The street glistened with reflections, the sound of water mixing with the distant hum of the city. A woman passed by, offered a polite smile. A man with an umbrella nodded in greeting. No one stared. No one pointed. The world didn't end. Each step felt lighter, freer, like shedding invisible weight. I ducked into a cafe to escape the heavier rain, the warmth of the room wrapping around me instantly. The barista smiled, asked for my order, and treated me like anyone else. It was such a small, normal interaction, and yet it felt monumental. As I waited for my drink, I caught sight of my reflection in the window again. Hair slightly damp, cheeks pink from the cold, eyes brighter than they'd been in years. I smiled without meaning to. For once, I didn't look like I was hiding. When I turned to leave, someone near the door stopped me. A woman, maybe a few years older than me, with kind eyes and a soft voice. "Sorry," she said. "I just wanted to say, I love your sweater." My heart skipped. "Oh," I stammered, smiling shyly. "Thank you." She nodded and went on her way. A simple moment. But it stayed with me long after I stepped back into the rain. By the time I got home I was soaked, but I didn't care. Claire looked up from the couch when I came in, her eyes widening slightly. "You did it," she said, as if she already knew. I nodded, unable to keep from smiling. "Yeah, I did." She stood, walked over, and without a word, hugged me. The kind of hug that says everything words can't. For the first time I felt something more than acceptance, something closer to belonging. Not just in her eyes but in my own skin. Later that night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the cafe. That woman's kindness. The way the world had gone on as usual. Maybe the fear I'd carried for so long wasn't truth. Maybe it was just the echo of all the times I'd been too afraid to live. And as the rain softened outside, I realized something quietly, powerfully true. The journey wasn't about becoming someone else. It was about returning to who I'd been all along. The morning after that rain felt like the first true sunrise of my life. Everything seemed sharper. The golden light spilling through the curtains, the soft rustle of the trees outside, the quiet hum of the city that no longer felt distant. Even the air smelled different, fresher somehow, as though something inside me had finally aligned with the world around me. But peace has a strange way of drawing out ghosts. As I sat at the kitchen table sipping tea, Claire reading across from me, an email notification appeared on my phone, from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My brother Ethan. The subject line was simple. "Hey, how have you been?" My stomach dropped. Ethan wasn't the kind of person who sent casual messages. The last time we'd talked, we'd argued about something small that had turned into something bigger, the kind of argument that revealed more than either of us wanted to admit. He'd always been the traditional one, the one who thought the world had clear rules, clear lines. And I'd always been the one quietly stepping over them. Claire noticed my expression and looked up. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. "It's Ethan." She nodded slowly, setting her book down. "You going to reply?" "I don't know." I stared at the screen. He's not the most open-minded person." She leaned back, studying me. "Maybe he's trying." I wanted to believe that. But I also remembered the last words he'd said to me. "You're always chasing something that doesn't make sense." Back then, I hadn't even known what I was chasing. Now I did. And I wasn't sure he'd ever understand. Still, something in me whispered that I couldn't hide forever. I typed a simple response. "Hey, been a while. I'm doing okay. How about you?" When I hit send, my heart raced like I'd jumped off a ledge. The reply came quicker than I expected. "Actually, I'm in town for a few days. Want to grab lunch?" I stared at the screen, torn between dread and curiosity. Seeing him again meant stepping into my past, into a world where I used to fit but no longer belonged. But maybe it was time. When I told Claire, she smiled supportively. "You don't owe him anything," she said. "But if you're ready, it could be a chance to show him who you really are." "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." She placed a hand on mine. "You don't have to try to be ready. You already are." The next day, I met him at a small restaurant near the park. He was already there when I arrived, wearing the same brown jacket he'd had for years. His posture straight, his expression guarded. When he saw me, his eyes flickered. Confusion first, then surprise. "You look different," he said after a moment. I smiled gently. "Yeah, I guess I do." He studied me for a long time, and I could almost feel the questions forming behind his calm exterior. But to my surprise, he didn't ask them, not yet. We talked about surface things first. Work, the weather, old memories. It was awkward at first, but gradually, the familiarity of his voice softened the edges. Then halfway through lunch he finally asked, "So, is this a phase or something else?" The question was blunt but not cruel. Still, it cut deeper than I expected. Took a breath. "It's not a phase, Ethan. Me. It's who I've always been, even when I didn't know how to say it." He looked down at his hands. "I guess I don't understand it." "I know," I said quietly. "You don't have to. Just respect that it's real." He didn't answer right away. But then he sighed, rubbing his temples. "You seem happy," he admitted. "I don't think I've ever seen you like this before." That single sentence felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Thanks," I said softly. When we parted, he gave me a half smile, hesitant, uncertain but genuine. "You're still my sibling," he said. "That won't change." It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a start. When I got home, Claire was waiting on the couch, pretending to scroll through her phone but clearly waiting for news. I didn't even have to say anything. She saw it in my eyes. "How'd it go?" I smiled faintly. "Better than I thought." She exhaled, visibly relieved. "See, the world doesn't fall apart when you let it see you." That night, I sat at my vanity, brushing through my hair, staring at my reflection again. For the first time, I didn't see conflict staring back at me. Only quiet strength. The kind that doesn't shout or demand, but simply exists. I wasn't just learning to live as myself. I was learning to face the pieces of my past that still lingered in the shadows. And maybe, just maybe, the rest of the world would learn to see me too, not as someone lost but as someone found. A few weeks after meeting Ethan, I felt a restlessness I couldn't shake. The quiet moments at home and the safe experiments with Claire had been comforting, but I realized something. Hiding in private only teaches you half of who you are. The other half, the part that belongs to the world, remained untested, waiting for its chance to breathe. It started with small, tentative steps. A walk through the park in slightly softer clothes than usual, a cafe stop with subtle makeup, just enough to feel visible without attracting attention. I told myself I was just stretching, but with each outing I felt a thrill I hadn't expected. Freedom was addictive. Then came the invitation that would push me further than I'd gone before. One of Claire's friends, Olivia, a local event planner, asked if we'd like to attend a small art gallery opening. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet crowd, wine, conversation. Claire seemed excited about the idea, but when she mentioned it, my stomach twisted. Crowd. Public. People I didn't know. All eyes potentially on me. "I think I should go," Claire said after seeing my hesitation. "It's just a small gathering. I'll be there with you." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, okay. I'll try." The night arrived, and I found myself standing in front of the mirror, carefully considering every detail. Not just the cardigan this time, but the soft blouse beneath it, the jeans that fit my curves in a way that felt natural, the faint shimmer of lip balm on my lips. I looked at my reflection and whispered, "You can do this." Claire arrived, glowing in her usual elegance, and squeezed my hand. "Ready." I swallowed hard. "As I'll ever be." The gallery was intimate, warm, filled with soft lighting and quiet chatter. The walls were adorned with abstract paintings, muted but striking, the kind that made you pause and linger. I could feel the nervous energy building in my chest, a combination of excitement and fear, but I forced myself to breathe. Claire led me through the room, introducing me to a few people with friendly smiles. "This is someone I've been telling you about," she said softly, and I realized the bravery in that statement. Even if the others didn't understand, she was giving me a presence in this world, a place to exist. People noticed me. Some glanced curiously, others smiled politely. A few engaged in conversation, asking about my interests, my thoughts on the art, my favorite pieces. I spoke softly, but I spoke. I laughed, moved. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was hiding behind someone else's version of myself. Halfway through the evening, a man approached me. Mid-30s, friendly expression, paint-smeared fingers that suggested he was one of the artists. "I couldn't help but notice your eyes," he said. "They look curious, alive. Do you paint too?" I smiled, shaking my head. "No, but I love observing." He nodded, clearly satisfied with my answer. Observation is just as important. You catch details others miss. His words lingered long after he walked away. Observation. Life. For once, my reflection in the gallery's mirrored wall felt like more than just a face. Felt like a statement. Soft, tentative, real. The rest of the night passed in a blur of quiet conversation, subtle glances, and moments where I caught myself laughing, genuinely. When we left, walking through the streets under the glow of street lamps, Claire slipped her hand into mine. "You did great," she whispered. I squeezed back, a soft smile forming. "Yeah, I think I did." That night, back at home, I stood in front of the mirror again. It wasn't about the cardigan or the makeup anymore. It was about me, standing, existing, and surviving in a world that might not fully understand. For the first time, I felt the quiet thrill of possibility. The world hadn't broken. The reflection hadn't lied. I was more than just safe in my room. I was safe in myself. But deep down, I knew the journey wasn't over. Being seen publicly was just the beginning. The real test would be whether I could keep this fragile courage alive, even when life got loud, chaotic, or judgmental. And somewhere beneath that thought, a quiet pulse of excitement whispered. The world was bigger than my fears, and I was finally ready to step into it. The weeks after the gallery opening were transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every small outing, coffee runs, bookstore visits, Even the mundane errands of daily life became exercises in bravery. The world seemed less threatening not because it had changed but because I had. Each time I allowed myself to be seen, even in the smallest ways, I felt the threads of fear loosen, replaced by a quiet confidence that was almost addictive. Claire noticed it first. "You're walking differently," she said one evening as we returned from a late-night walk. "Straighter, lighter. You're more present." I laughed softly. "I guess I am." "Guess?" she teased, nudging my shoulder. "You know it." She was right. Every day I caught glimpses of myself, in the reflective windows of a shop, the polished surface of the elevator, even in passing mirrors, and each reflection confirmed something I had been learning slowly. I was not a shadow of who I'd been. I was becoming, piece by piece, a more honest version of myself. But transformation, I soon realized, wasn't just about the mirror or the clothes. It was about motion. How you moved through the world, how you responded to it, how you chose to inhabit space without shrinking. One rainy afternoon, I found myself at the local park, umbrella in hand. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and crisp leaves. Children splashed in puddles, couples hurried past, and joggers cut a determined path along the winding trails. I walked slowly, letting the world pass around me, savoring the feeling of being just present. That's when I saw her. A girl no older than 12, standing awkwardly on the curb, clutching a backpack too large for her frame. She looked uncertain, nervous, like she wanted to disappear. And in a flash, I saw myself mirrored in her hesitation. The same tension, the same fear of being seen for who I truly was. Without thinking, I approached her gently. "Hey," I said softly. "Are you okay?" She looked up, startled, then quickly down again. I don't want to cross the street," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Do you want some help?" "Yes." She nodded hesitantly, and I guided her across the wet street, keeping my voice calm, steady. On the other side, she looked at me and smiled faintly. "Thanks," she said. Something inside me stirred, a strange, tender recognition. Helping her had nothing to do with me, and yet it had everything to do with me. It was proof that the person I was becoming could exist in the world, quietly, gently, without hiding. That evening, I returned home feeling a lightness I hadn't expected. Claire looked up from the couch, eyebrows raised. "You're glowing," she said simply. I shrugged, still smiling. "I guess I'm starting to feel like I'm moving through life, not just watching it." She studied me quietly, then nodded. "That's all it ever is, movement. You take one step, then another, and slowly, the reflection in the mirror starts to match the reflection in your mind." Her words lingered as I stood in front of my mirror later that night. I traced the lines of my face with my fingertips, noticing the soft curve of my jaw, the subtle glow of my skin, the faint shimmer of the nail polish I had worn all day. The reflection staring back at me was familiar and strange all at once, a reminder that identity is never fixed, but constantly evolving. I smiled at myself, truly smiled, and whispered, "I'm ready for the next step." Because transformation wasn't just about who I was alone in my room. It was about who I could be in the world, in motion, unafraid, and unapologetically real. The morning sunlight spilled into my room like a quiet celebration. I sat on the edge of the bed, cardigan draped over my shoulders, staring at the reflection in the mirror one last time before leaving the apartment. There was a calmness there now, a steadiness I had never known. Not perfect, not complete, but undeniably me. Claire had already left for work, leaving a note on the counter. "Be gentle with yourself. You're already extraordinary." I smiled at her handwriting. A simple message, but it carried more weight than any grand declaration ever could. Today was different. Today wasn't about experimenting, hiding, or testing boundaries. Today was about living openly, fully, and honestly. I had an appointment at the local library for a small panel discussion about creativity and identity. A place where I could be seen, not for my clothes, not for my reflection, but for me. On the subway, I felt the familiar rush of anxiety creeping in. People brushed past, conversations hummed around me, and every glance felt magnified in my mind. But I reminded myself, I had done this before. I had faced strangers, friends, family. I had walked in public, stood under rain, smiled at mirrors, and confronted my fears. When I arrived, the library's small auditorium was already filling. People of all ages and backgrounds gathered, chatting quietly, their curiosity palpable. I checked in with the coordinator, a kind woman who gave me an encouraging nod, and then stepped toward the stage. As I faced the audience, I felt a moment of hesitation. The lights, the eyes, the expectation, it all pressed down like gravity. But then I remembered the little girl in the park, the woman at the cafe, Ethan's hesitant acknowledgement. I remembered every step, every reflection, every whisper of courage that had brought me here. I began to speak, my voice soft at first, then stronger, carrying conviction I hadn't realized I possessed. I talked about my journey, the quiet beginnings, the hesitant experiments, the small victories of being seen and accepted. I spoke about fear, about identity, about the courage it takes to step out of the shadows and into your own life. The audience listened. They nodded, some smiled, some murmured softly, but all of them saw me. Not the cardigan, not the stockings, not the reflection, me. When I finished, a ripple of applause filled the room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was genuine. And as I stepped off the stage, my chest lifted with a quiet pride. I realized this was the culmination of every small choice I had made along the way. Back outside, the sunlight warmed my face. The streets were alive, indifferent, yet embracing. I walked with my head held high, noticing the world in the same way I noticed myself, with curiosity, care, and the freedom to exist fully. Later, back at home, I stood before my mirror one final time. The cardigan hung loosely over my shoulders, a soft reminder of where it all began. I traced my reflection with a fingertip, feeling the gentle pulse of my own presence. I smiled, a smile not born of perfection or approval, but of acceptance. I whispered to myself, softly, firmly, I am me, I'm here, and I am visible. The journey wasn't over. It never truly ends. But for the first time I knew with certainty that I could face it, step by step, reflection by reflection, with courage and grace. The stockings, the cardigan, the quiet experiments, they had all been the start, the beginning of a journey that would continue endlessly as long as I chose to embrace it. And in that moment, standing in my own skin, I finally felt whole.